WeenCast, a Ween podcast with Rory Gibbons and Shane Prutzky.
Hey, what's up? This is Shane.
And this is Rory.
And this is WeenCast. And we welcome you. This is our 10th...
Good day to all.
Yeah. What's up, everybody? This is our 10th episode. And we are totally psyched. This is the... it's hard to believe it's actually been 10 episodes. We're very proud of that. I know for a lot of podcasts out there, it doesn't really mean anything. It's a drop in the bucket, you know. But there's also a lot of podcasts out there that never make it to 10 episodes. So we're happy to be here. We invite you to check out some of the past episodes. All of them have been about a specific Ween show. Each episode has revolved around a specific Ween show that we talk about and review and whatnot. But for the 10th episode, we really want to do something fun and something different and talk about our favorite Ween albums. It's something we've been talking about doing for a long time. We've been going back and forth, having a lot of different discussions about which ones are our favorite. How can you choose? It's very difficult because I think I speak for a lot of Ween fans out there, if not all Ween fans, and say I love them all. They're all great. Go ahead, Rory.
Yeah, it's some of these, as we were thinking and about, how do you pick your top three? It's so close, and it's like razor thin margins, and the ones just because just because an album doesn't make the cut for us doesn't mean that it wasn't really close.
Yeah. So basically, what we decided on doing is instead of choosing our very favorite, because it's just too difficult. We just couldn't decide. There's no way that we could say, okay, this one album is our absolute favorite. We basically decided, let's do a top three. Can we do a top three Ween albums that we could say, okay, we're comfortable that these three are our favorite albums. We'll defend that up and down. And we kind of came to a conclusion over the last few weeks of having some discussions back and forth and stuff. So here's kind of what we came up with. Two of them we agree on. That, my top three and Rory's top three, two of the albums are the same. And then there's...
Yeah, so we came up with each of our own top threes, yes, independent of each other.
Right.
And then shared to each other what we thought our top three were.
Right. So both of us agreed that two of them on our lists are the same. And then there's one that we differ on. It's been a lot of fun. I just want to tell Rory, it's been a lot of fun having, these conversations back and forth over the last few weeks, and it's been a great time.
Yeah, we've each made sure to go back and, listen to each album, kind of deliberately and go through the chronology and just re-listen to them and think of them as albums. Watching them live so much, it's easy to kind of think of songs and think of Ween just on the live side. But they made studio albums, and they put together 9 albums, and so they are something that deserves to be listened to in their own right, and not just hearing the songs live as part of a live set list.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to throw in real quick, we're from the era of the album, so to speak. I mean, when we were teenagers and whatnot, it was like the era of the CD, right? So that is what you had, when we were teenagers and we were getting into Ween and different types of bands and different types of music. It was like, that's what you had available. This is back before the days of, excessive internet, at least, and you couldn't just go on YouTube. You couldn't just go on, Amazon Music or ask your Alexa to just play Ween songs, or you couldn't do it. So basically it's like,
You didn't go on Pandora and type in Ween.
Right.
Or type in David Bowie.
Yeah, there was
get a lot of Ween.
There wasn't
things like that.
There wasn't any of that. So basically, you had what I hate to say stuck with, but it's kind of true. And it's like, you put in a Ween CD in the car, and more than likely you're going to listen to the whole thing, if not, most of it at least. So we're from that sort of like era of like, we just always go back to, the different albums, Pure Guava, Chocolate and Cheese, Mollusk, whatever it might be, and those records mean a lot to us. It's like, it's easy to just sort of say, okay, nowadays you just, Ween comes on your phone or your computer and just plays random songs or whatever. But those albums are special to us. And I think a lot of people who sort of grew up before the days of like the easy to get music, if I may, so I just want to throw that in there real quick.
There's a lot of things that go into an album, like how do you order the songs? Like what are the thematic elements of the album? What kind of variety does the album have? How much brownness? How brown does the album get? There's a lot of different factors when you're thinking about, what goes into an album, and then why is one, what goes into being a top three, like there's a lot of different things. It's not just being like, oh, okay, oh, this song's on there, great. It's kind of like you really have to listen to the album as a whole and take it in as a whole.
Right, totally.
And so that's what we were trying to do as we, assessed our top three. And we discussed having kind of a rubric to sort of choose them more objectively, but we never really went so far as to like tabulate, a score for each album to decide which ones were the top. It was more of a holistic listening and just sort of thinking about the songs on them, and then just listening to it as a whole and thinking, okay, how does this move me? Like why is this album great? What's great about it, and what is detracts from it?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things is like we're during this discussion we're gonna be kind of critical, because you have to be when you're talking about something like this. And that was one of the things where when we first started talking about doing this, it was kind of like, okay, well, when you're listening to one of these albums, what song would you possibly skip? What songs would you say, okay, well, the rest of this album is great, but this kind of detracts from it, or that kind of detracts from it. Because when you're talking about the Ween albums, again, it's so easy to just be like, well, they're all so great. I love everything. I love every song. It's like, well, that's kind of a given, for a lot of us, if I dare say, Ween fans. It's so easy to just say, yeah. I love everything. So you have to sort of take like a critical, mindset when you're really breaking it down and you're really getting into what's your favorite and what do you think are, your favorite albums of theirs. So
yeah, the thing, and when I mentioned that, you have to look at the songs on the album and the album as a whole versus just thinking about the live performances, there are definitely songs that when I listen to them on the album, I'm definitely not as in awe of those songs as I am when they're live. There are some songs that on the album, they kind of don't work that well or don't stand out very well, but when they're live, they're amazing. And so it really is about like listening to those albums and not just, oh, that song, because songs can be presented in different mediums.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's kind of
something that
it's taking a different approach to those songs. It's like, I love that song, but on this album, it's like, well, maybe it hasn't been completely, fleshed out yet at the time or whatever,
Yeah, and so another band that I love that has a lot of great albums are the Beatles. And so you'll hear me probably drop a few Beatles references to kind of help align, what I'm trying to say about the various albums today. But the one thing, like, Shane mentioned, sort of skippable, or songs that you would just skip if you were in the car. So think of it this way. Like, you listen to the White Album, and it's fantastic. But then you come across Revolution Number 9. You skip it.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
I'm not saying, because you're just chilling and jamming, it's like, oh, you just skip that one, because it's kind of like, okay, well, you know, it is what it is, and you can respect it, and it's cool or whatever. It doesn't work, does work, but you skip it.
Yeah, I mean, we're just kind of being honest about it. It's like, okay, you know, it's just too easy to just say, I love everything. I love them all. I love all the tracks. It's like, yeah, but come on, you know, let's be honest about it. If you were just listening to this album, you know, Ween, the Beatles, whoever it is, it's like, would you really just listen to every single track, or would you skip a couple here and there? You know, it's okay. It's okay. You know, so
yes.
We just want to mention, so what's included and what's not. To us, it's kind of common sense. Basically, we're just talking about the studio albums here, the Ween studio albums. No live stuff, no compilations, no EPs, nothing like that. So, God, Ween, Satan, The Pod, Pure Guava, Chocolate and Cheese, 12 Golden Country Greats, The Mollusk, White Pepper, Quebec, and La Cucaracha. So those are what we are going to talk about. All of the major studio albums by Ween. I think that, again, that's kind of common sense to a lot of Ween fans, but we're not going to get into the live stuff or anything like that. It's just the mainstream studio albums. Okay? And, again, we picked our top 3. All right? Both of us picked a top 3. We agree on 2 of them, and there's one that we differ on. So that's 4 different Ween albums. All right. So we're going to start off and we're going to talk about the rest of them. So not those 4. We're going to save those to the end, or save those until after. But we're going to talk about the best of the rest, or whatever you want to say. So we're going to just do a random order. We're going to talk about the rest of those albums in a random order. And what we're going to do, we have a dice prepared. This is kind of geeky on a lot of different levels. I realize that, but we have a dice that Rory is going to roll, and whatever number comes up, he is assigned to one of the rest of those albums, and that's the way that we're going to talk about them.
Yeah, so we're just gonna say a quick word about the ones that don't make the cut. It's a die, by the way, please. It's
singular.
I'm
sorry. Okay.
I got my 10-sided die, and each of the 5 albums that didn't make the cut have been assigned 2 numbers, and so that way it's random, so that no one knows what's gonna come next.
Okay, yeah, that's a great way to do it.
Are we ready to get started with this?
I'm ready whenever you're ready, man.
All right. I don't know if the sound of the die in my little dice box will come on the mic, but we'll see.
That's great.
All right, and so the first one to talk about that didn't make the cut, a little appropriate that it's the first one, La Cucaracha.
Okay, I kind of figured that would happen, so we're gonna go straight to the last album put out and talk about La Cucaracha. Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, well, you know, La Cucaracha, I think, is a great album. I think it's very creative. I think there's a lot of creativity in that album, and there's more good things in that album than a lot of bands probably will ever do in their entire career, you know, to be honest. But by that point, you're starting to see, in my opinion, sort of like a Ween, you know, formula. You know, you go down the track listing, and it's kind of like, okay, well, we're going to need to have one of these songs, one of these songs, one of these songs, and one of these songs. There's a couple of great gems on the album. Your Party, I think, is a great song, is something that will stand up to basically anything they've ever made, studio-wise or otherwise. And a couple of other good highlights, but for the most part, you know, it doesn't really hold up to, you know, the rest of the albums. That's a very critical stance on it, but that's kind of how I feel about it.
If I'm being honest, it feels a little bit derivative of itself.
Right.
It's a little bit. It's almost like if someone else was trying to be Ween, like, how do we make a Ween album? It's a little bit distant, but we're not here to be shame makers. So, but so anyway, so La Cucaracha didn't make the cut.
I love it.
not anything too great, and a little bit of been there, done that.
Yeah.
So all right, so let's see what's the next one.
Okay.
All right, so the next one that did not make the cut, White Pepper.
Okay. So, great album. Again, some amazing songs. I think the problem, I'll give my own personal, sort of like nostalgia opinion on that album. The problem for me anyway with that was probably at the time I had heard a lot of those songs being played before the album actually came out. So when it actually came out, it was kind of like, okay, I've heard all of these before. Okay, that's my own personal take on it. A lot of great stuff on that album, but I think from the albums that came before it, it was kind of like, this is good, but it's not up to par with some of the other stuff that had come out previously.
Well, I mean, I guess I would be a little bit lighter in my rebuke, but because I would say, White Pepper, and I agree with what you said about excuse me, I agree with what you said about it's we had heard a lot of these songs live before the album, so it was a little bit different when you got it and you listened to them as an album than some of the earlier albums for us. I would say White Pepper is fantastic overall. There's really no throwaway songs on that album. It's really pretty good top to bottom, and there are definitely a few just really great songs like Stay Forever. I think it's just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And Flutes of the Chi. But I would say this is one where it just didn't quite make the cut. It's like if I'm saying there's got to be 3, then there's got to be 3.
Yeah.
And I can't say, oh, well, we got to be 4, got to be 5. It's like, the whole point of this podcast is that we're making a cut and saying these are the top. And sorry, White Pepper, you just didn't quite get there, because it's not a reflection on your poverty, it's a reflection on how great so many Ween albums are.
Right. And if I could say one other thing real quick about that album would be, it's almost like it has 3 different pieces to it. I'm looking at the track listings of everything here next to me, and it's kind of like exactly where I'm at through Bananas and Blow, Stroker Ace to Pandy Fackler, and Stay Forever through She's Your Baby. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody else, but I've always kind of felt that way. It has sort of 3 chunks to it, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
It may not flow very well, all together. Each track on that album is great. Like you said, there isn't really too many skippable tracks, but if we're gonna say an album as a piece of work, as a whole piece of art together, it may not really have the sort of thing that flows as well as some of the others. Again, a critical stance, but kind of true.
Yeah. So, all right. So, you ready for the next one?
Let's do it.
All right. So the next one that didn't make the cut. Use a 12-sided die on this one. So the next one to talk about that did not make the cut. This one is probably going to be controversial to a lot of you. So let's get it out there. God, Ween, Satan.
Okay, so God, Ween, Satan, I love, to death. I've listened to that album. I mean, it's got to be easily hundreds of times, in my life. It's a very great example of sort of teenage angst, if you will. If you go back and listen to it as an adult, you can feel the youth in it as you listen to it. But there again, it's sort of it's before some of the truly great things that they would accomplish, and it doesn't have the maturity of the things that would be yet to come after it, if that's fair.
Yeah, God, Ween, Satan is an amazing album, and it's like Roots of Ween, and it's one of those things where when you're a hardcore Ween fan, you really want to say, yes, God Ween Satan is one of my top albums. And I probably had God Ween Satan as one of my top couple albums for like a really long time. And probably going into this, preparing for this podcast, probably I was expecting it to be in that top three.
Right.
But as I listen to it, I'm just realizing, this is a little bit like proto-Ween. Like, it's a little bit too raw in a lot of places.
Yeah.
Where you're seeing these... There's some amazing songs, don't get me wrong. There are some really amazing songs that, like, go down as some of the best Ween songs ever. And there's a lot of Ween songs, So that's a credit. But sometimes they feel like they're not quite fully formed. That the band hasn't... That the... Jeter and Diener haven't quite completely mastered the elements. I think that also one of the themes that I felt is like they definitely benefited from the inclusion of more musicians and more permanent musicians as part of the band. And so I think this is an example of where I kind of realized listening to the album that a lot of the songs became way better live, like over the years. And that when I listen to the album, it's kind of like, wow, these aren't quite fully formed, And so as great as that album is, I had to kind of say, you know what? I can't make the cut.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, also, again, it's a good example of there are some great sort of like strings of songs. In other words, it's like tracks, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Are great, and that's a great little block there, and that's a great little block here. But as far as like the whole thing, it's also very long. It's a long album with a lot of very short songs. So it's like as a whole piece of work all together. It's very like here and there and everywhere. Speaking of the Beatles, but as a complete like work of art. Might not have the same kind of like flow as some of like the later stuff.
Yeah. All right. So there are 2 left that did not make the cut. You ready for the next one?
Yeah, man.
And the next one we're going to talk about is The Pod.
Okay. So, there again, it's tough because I love The Pod. A great sort of experimental album, if I may. The Pod is almost kind of like if you were to say, okay, here, we're going to take these dudes, lock them in a room with, a 4-track, a guitar, and a drum machine and see what they come up with in 6 months. That's kind of like The Pod, It's great. It has a lot of great stuff, but it can be a little slow. It can be a little sort of like on like the depressing side. The whole mono thing at the time, I'm sure, played into that. Again, it's very long, and it has a lot of songs on it. So maybe it would have benefited to, have some of those songs just be left off as like B-sides, or whatever.
So yeah, I would say The Pod would have benefited from tightening up the song list.
Right.
I think there's so many truly great songs like Sorry Charlie, Demon Sweat, Captain Fantasy, Rights to the Waves and the Rules of the World.
Yeah, great.
There's so many great Pork Rolling and Cheese is like one of the legends.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's just also a lot of like skippable stuff. They could have benefited from chopping some of that stuff out of there and then maybe producing the songs. And again, obviously, that's one of the things about this album is that it's not like produced. But not even just the equipment, but just the idea of like kind of putting the songs to a certain degree, in terms of like, is this a final product? I think some of what I said for God Ween Satan, I think is still true here. I think it's like proto-Ween. This is like the early stuff, and it's brilliant, but just not quite complete enough to justify saying this is top 3.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely seeing a progression in terms of, the songs and like how thought out they are and everything from God, Ween, Satan to the pod. You know, there's some more stuff taken seriously, you know, that's for sure. But you know, but yeah, I mean, it doesn't have, you know, sort of the fully fleshed out stuff that they would come to do. Yeah. But the pod is a great example of, you know, like I said, I don't know if the whole thing is really just those two guys or not. I know there's a couple of other people that come in and out on that album, you know, or whatever, but it is still a great example of, like, these guys just did this with like a drum machine and like you know, you can tell a lot of like the drum effects and whatnot on it are fake, but it doesn't matter. It's still good, you know. It's still cool, you know. Yeah. So it's a great example of something great made with very little. If I could say that about it.
Mm-hmm. So that brings us to
one left.
The last one that didn't make the cut.
Yeah.
And that would be, don't have to roll a die for that one because I know which one it is. And it is Quebec.
Quebec, right. So now we're back to the end of the I don't want to say the end of their career, but the second to last studio album.
Yeah, and what I would say about Quebec is, this album it's so conflicted in my heart, and I would say that it was close to being that top three. It was close to being there, but it's a little bit like the Beatles' White Album. You know, it's like there's just a bit too much throwaway stuff here. That's sort of like, you know what, that's cool and all, and I bet that'll be great live, but like, does it really do anything for me?
Yeah.
You know, so many people in the neighborhood. Great. You know, I'm going to go watch Sesame Street now, you know? Like, you know, Alkin Road, you know, like, I'm not trying to diss it, but it's like, you know, in terms of like a cohesive album, like, what's it doing for me? And so, but there's also some amazingly great songs, like The Argus is one of the most amazing Ween songs ever, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, you know, I really like Transdermal Celebration. You know, I always thought that was a great song.
Yeah, Tried and True, Chocolate Town, If You Could Save Yourself is just like an amazing psychological portrayal of the artist, mm-hmm. you know, and it's not something that you even get much of. This introspection, like you don't get that much of that like in earlier Ween, so it's amazing, but just a little bit too much on there to say, you know what, this is tops, you know, like I'm not trying to be overly critical of it, but I think the album could benefit from being about 15 minutes shorter, 10 to 15 minutes shorter, and just take a few.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, again, you know, we had mentioned with La Cucaracha, it's like by this time you're seeing, okay, well, we got to get one of these songs in there. You know, it's going to be a long night. It's like, okay, it's cool, you know, if I'm in the mood for that kind of thing. But, you know, it's like, okay, we got to get one of, like, the obnoxious, you know, raucous, you know, tracks on there. We got to get, you know, something like the Fuck Jam. You know, just something stupid that's kind of you know, just an instrumental-ish kind of... I mean, okay, yeah, it's cool, but it's just like, you know, if we're being honest, you know, again, you know, in the car, you're just going to let that go or you're going to skip it. You're probably going to skip it, you know. So,
yeah, you know, it's kind of like, you know, hey, Diener, have you done that song that's rude and crude yet? Oh, no, God, I'll get to it. I got it. You know, like, you know, you sort of, you know, you're like checking off the boxes.
Check it, right. We need one of these, one of these, one of these, one of these, you know. So there are some great gems on Quebec. But I agree. It's kind of like there's too many things on it that are kind of like, well, you know, they could have just left this off, you know. So, again,
but so
great album.
Yeah. So I mean that's all the ones that did make the cut. We love them all, and we weren't trying to be overly critical. We're just trying to lay out some of the reasons why we couldn't put them up in the top three. So so that takes us to there's 4 albums left. And so we'll start with talking about the ones that were not unanimous. And so the first one that I'll introduce, and this one's, Shane, probably, before I reveal it, would you say this one might be controversial to many?
Maybe, yeah.
But anyway, so, and this is one that I voted for, not Shane, for top 3. I said Golden Country Greats.
Great album. Amazing album, really.
Yeah, this is what I would say. So, as Ween grew and evolved as a band, obviously we're going to be talking about Pure Guava coming up here. Obviously we're going to be talking about Chocolate and Cheese. Obviously we're going to be talking about The Mollusk, because we haven't mentioned those albums yet.
Right.
So everyone out there knows what's going on here. So you have that period, and all those albums came, like 2 of those albums, Pure Guava, Chocolate and Cheese, are them as they're building and evolving, becoming like this great band, this great, Aaron and Mickey like together, and then starting to add on these musicians that are contributing to the band, and they're coming into their own and putting together these amazing albums. And Golden Country Greats comes along, and it's probably the most audacious thing that they've ever attempted. And these are the reasons why, right, that I'm like, it's got to be top 3. Because it's so audacious. They're just like, we're going to go down to record a country album. We're going to get the Shit Creek Boys. We're going to get a country band to back us, and we're going to put together this freaking country album. It's so audacious. And I got to tell you, like, in my humble opinion, there's really not a skippable song on the album, because one of the things about Golden Country Greats is it's a concept. It's a country album, and every single song is like actually like a fantastic country song. And even ones that are a little bit more ribald, like Piss Up a Rope, Mr. Richard Smoker, it's like they still end up working, and the other songs where you think, oh, this is Ween, they're going to be a little goofy, talking about breakfast at Shoney's. Well, they end up just being sublimely perfect country songs that put you like on that rural route highway, cruising down, in down Kentucky way, down Tennessee way, and it just puts you right there, and you realize that these are just beautiful. It's like, how can these crazy kids write such amazingly perfect country songs?
Yeah, totally. I mean, just the country album is a great example of it's shorter than some of the stuff that came before it, and it really is only 10 tracks, but they're all great. They're all great. The only thing that kept this out of my top 3, I would say, is the other albums that have so many different sort of variedness to them. This song is here, this song is there. They're all going in different directions, and yet flow very nicely together. It's like the country album flows, no questions asked, but it all is on sort of the same wavelength. It's like that's what's great about it too. But like, in my opinion, I just think when it's compared to something else, Chocolate and Cheese, something like that, it's a little bit too much on the same, page. But I can listen to the whole thing, no problem.
Although, granted, we're not comparing it to Chocolate and Cheese because that's already in our top 3 as well.
I'm not
So if you compare it to the ones that aren't in the top 3.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why it just didn't make the top 3 for me. But it's very hard because I love the country album. Again, I listened to the whole thing, and you're absolutely right. There isn't really anything on it that's kind of, does that need to be there? No, they're all great.
Well, and what I would say is, what other Ween album is just like they're all similar? You know what I mean? It makes it different from every other Ween album.
That's true.
It's like all the other ones have this sort of variety to what's being played, to what's being put on the album, even if they have some kind of cohesive concept, or cohesive thematics. But Golden Country Greats is like, this is a country album, and we're going to lay this out.
It's true.
And it's just amazing, like, postmodern moment of music history. It's like this crazy alt rock, whatever, you want to call it, Ween band, we were like gonna go and do a country album, and we're gonna do it as good as any country band, and they pulled it off.
They totally pull it off. No questions asked.
The other thing that I would say is, as I was listening to the albums, I got to Golden Country Greats, and I'm listening to it, and I'm just enjoying myself and like singing along to all the songs and just like getting into it, and just thinking like, it's one of those things where it's easy for fans to just be like, oh well, it's a country album, so you don't like even put it in the same like hierarchy of all the others. It's almost like, well, you put it aside because it's a country album. It's like, no, this is one of their finest works. Like, I truly believe it's one of their finest works.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And that's probably one of the things that happens to me is I kind of separate that one a little bit. I just can't help it. It's just how, my brain goes through them, and it's like, okay, that's kind of like an exception, but it's really not. And I mean, it's really, there are some absolutely beautiful songs on the country album.
You Were the Fool?
Yeah.
You Were the Fool? And Fluffy is, talk about, that one's a little bit different than the rest, right? So that's a little bit of your variety. But even Fluffy, which is kind of like an absurd song a bit, is such a perfect end to a song. Or end to an album, excuse me. And it's such a perfect end to that album.
I mean, you got...
Just like it's the end of the day and the sun's going down behind the mountain and it's humid and you're on the back porch, and it's like, fluffy, and it's just like you got your Budweiser and you're drinking a beer and the, mosquitoes are biting and the frogs are chirping.
It puts you there, man. It puts you there, right?
Yeah.
And some other great tracks in there. I'm Holding You. I Don't Want to Leave You on the Farm, So just beautiful songs, really.
And Japanese Cowboy, don't take that for granted. Don't take that for granted.
It still has the sense of humor, It definitely still has a sense of humor going on, Another one of those albums where the first couple of times you listen to it, you're laughing and just like, oh, isn't this crazy? And then, you listen to it a few more times and it's like, no, this is just fucking great, So. Yeah,
and there's something like Piss Up a Rope, I can see how that might turn some people off that aren't that into Ween. But it's also just like, talk about a mockery, it just fits so well because it is so...
Yeah, like talk about like a fuck you, you know what I mean? Like, again, as you said, they pull it off, So should we go to the next one?
Sure. You want to introduce that one?
So the other one that I would say for me that I would put in my top three that Rory excluded, and it's okay, would be Pure Guava.
It was really hard for me not to put this in my top three.
Yeah, I mean, it
was really hard for me. I mean, like, we're talking about, like, millimeters.
Right.
In terms of, like, how do you even compare the two albums?
One of the things about Pure Guava, I mean, I could probably talk about it for, hours, but one of the things I kind of realized when going back and listening to all of these albums again, the Pod and Pure Guava, it's almost like two sides of like a coin, like the light side and the dark side, if you will. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a part one and part two. Of both of those albums, I mentioned when we were talking about the Pod, it's kind of like, okay, let's just lock ourselves in a room and see what we come up with. But by the time Pure Guava comes around, now they're starting to get their shit together for real. As far as it's still a simple album, but they're really trying to make it great. They're really trying to make it good. And it is. Pure Guava for me, for the longest time, I would say, is the best example of, it still has that sophomoric edge and the humor and the, okay, it's crude and it's rude and, all that. But it also has a lot of beauty also. There are some skippable tracks, it's another good example of, okay, if they would have just left, these off, no one would have mind, no one would have a problem.
No one would have been the wiser.
So like I'm looking at the track listing here next to me, and I mean, I could literally listen to that whole album all the way through until you get to track 15, which is Morning Glory. And it's like, what the fuck? Why, anyone who wants to say I love that song is a lying piece of shit. You know, it's like, I'm sorry, it's just it does not belong on a album really at all. It doesn't belong on a Ween album or really any other album. And those three, it's like 15, 16, and 17. Morning Glory, Loving You Through It All, and Hey Fat Boy Asshole. If they would have just left those off, you know, you still would have had a full-length album, and it would have been probably twice as good. You know?
Well, that is my critique of Pure Guava.
Yeah.
Is that it does have a few skippable songs. It has amazing... This is really when Ween starts to come into their own. You know, like from here on out, you know, we're talking about, you know, the rest of the top 3 lists that we're discussing is going to be the next album after this, and the one then 2 right after that. And we just talked about it's like there's 4 in a row there that we kind of lumped, right? It's like the golden era, and this is the beginning of it. They're just becoming brilliant songwriters, and it's just amazing to see it. And they're also improving production values, appreciating those kind of things. I think more so, but also just the songwriting. It's just brilliant. Like the Stallion Part 3 is brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, and actually, Shane, that reminded me of that time we were hanging out in Worcester, Mass, and walking through the streets between houses we were visiting, just singing a cappella The Stallion Part 3.
I don't remember that per se, but I believe it.
So, but that's how great that song is that we were just singing a cappella in the streets for all who would listen.
But, I mean, there are some really great songs on that album, and I know that we're trying to separate, you know, the album tracks from the live show, but basically, like, they could play anything from Pure Guava live, and I'd be all about it. And it wouldn't be something where it's like, oh, you know, they play that every night or, you know, whatever. It's like I'd be down to hear any one of those songs anytime. You know, I can listen to that album. I have that album on vinyl. And that is definitely one to get on vinyl. If I could geek out for just a second, because you can hear like all of the little like sounds and things in the background, and it's just great. It's just great. You know, that's just one I could pop in, and like I said, I'm good up until, you know, track 15. Yeah, you know.
Well, I would say I would definitely, you know, not need to listen to Hey Fat Boy.
Yeah, right.
No
right.
offense.
15, 16, and 17. That includes that. Yeah, that includes that. And then you got Don't Get Too Close to My Fantasy.
But Don't Get Too Close to My Fantasy is amazing.
Yeah,
right?
You know. So just a lot of great songs that would go on to have an amazing life to them. And again, it's like they're starting to really care, I think, when you're looking at Pure Guava. It still has the goofy edge. It still has the early stuff, the early feel, but it's also really great, you know?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a fantastic album, and I would say that it was really difficult for me to not put this in my top 3 either.
Right.
Like, I gotta tell everyone out there that this was definitely not easy to make a top 3.
No, the whole thing was very difficult.
You know? Like, it was definitely very difficult to be like, wow, I can only put top 3 up there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you have to, we've sort of forced ourselves, like you have to choose, you know? So the next one and
you know, and so it definitely made me think about these albums in different ways and in a more critical eye.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So there's 2 of them that, you know, Rory and I agree with. I have no qualms about saying.
Yeah. These 2 are unanimous. So in a way, this makes these the top 2. We're not really going to say like, ooh, this is the number 1. That's not we didn't want to put that much pressure on ourselves. But these are obviously, I guess, for us, the top 2 because we both chose to have them in our top 3. And so the next one is that we'll talk about. These are not. These are in chronological order, I guess. Chocolate and Cheese.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
I would say Chocolate and Cheese. So the first thing is some of you out there are probably going to say, oh, well, that's the easy one. Oh, of course. You know, like obviously, you know, sort of like just derisively, like, you know, it's like that's the easy one, you know, like. And I thought about that, Shane, you know, when we were deciding on this, I was almost like, do I want to include Chocolate and Cheese in the top 3? Like, is that the easy way out? You know, like when I was younger, maybe a more pretentious Ween head, I think when someone asks you, oh, what's your favorite album? When you're a hardcore Ween fan, you're not supposed to say Chocolate and Cheese. You're supposed to be like, my favorite album? The Pod.
Yeah.
You know? Like that's what you're supposed to do when you're a hardcore Ween fan.
Yeah, you got to show your stripes.
And you know, so I definitely had that conversation in my head, and it was like, is this the easy way out? But what I'm going to say is, no, because Chocolate and Cheese is just so fucking good.
Yeah.
Like, it is just, like, the epitome, the high water mark of just, like, putting together a Ween fucking album. And the production value, the work put into the songs, the variety, the beautiful, like, lyrics of some of these songs. And you also have several songs that I think most Ween fans take for granted.
Yeah.
You know, as being passé. Like Freedom of 76.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is just like the most amazing, like, you know, I don't even know what kind of song that is. Maybe someone can chime in on the message boards. You know, it's like, but like, it's like a mode of song. It's like a style of song, and it's like this love letter to Philadelphia. And when you know, like, what he's talking about in the song and how it relates to the city and stuff like that, it becomes this love letter to Philadelphia. And it's almost like, you know, like, I think about Bob Dylan songs, and it's like, how can Bob sing a song about a historical event and then have it all rhyme and just fit into a song? Like, how does he do that? Well, Ween did it on Freedom of 76. You know, it's like, you know, how do you make that all flow together and then have it be about this love letter? You know, it's just amazing to put that together. So people shouldn't take that for granted.
Yeah.
Roses Are Free. You know, I'm a little bit down on Roses Are Free. Like, normally, I got to admit, it's not my favorite song. But I also want to give it props because, you know, and I've had some fun in the past with you, Shane, about Fish. Because I'm not, you know, big Fish head. But it is something to be said that if one of the greatest jam bands in history chooses to cover that song, like, it must say something about the song.
Yeah, I mean, Rory and I were talking a little bit last night, getting prepared for the podcast, and we brought that up, and I mean, it's kind of true. It's like, you know, I'm a bigger Fish fan than Rory, and it's like, you know, there isn't a whole lot of stuff that, you know, Fish covers on a regular basis that's by one of their, you know, contemporaries. Really, I mean, you know, Ween's never really reached the level of popularity, you know, as Fish has, but, you know, it's like, that's, you know, that says something. I mean, it really does. I mean, you know, we joke around about it and everything, but it's like, that really does say something, that they respect them and a song that they did so much that they put it into their, you know, their regular rotation. Really, you know, you'll find that pop up on basically, I think, just about every Fish tour. You know what I mean? So it does say something. I agree with Rory. You know, it's like, if I were to ask someone, like, you know, find out someone's a Ween fan and ask them their favorite album, I would almost say, like, what's your favorite album besides Chocolate and Cheese? You know, because that's just such an obvious, you know, go-to. You know, it's like talking to, like, a Pink Floyd fan, and, you know, for me, in my opinion, I would just say, like, you know, what's your favorite Floyd album besides Dark Side? You know, like, because that's just, I consider that to be certainly one of the greatest albums, if not the greatest album of all time. You know, so it is kind of like that. It's like, you know, when you look at this, the track listing from Chocolate and Cheese, it's sort of like the basis of their live career. You know, really, it's the standards of Ween. You know what I mean? Voodoo Lady.
Yeah, and it has so much variety that you can get that.
Yeah, it has the...
You know, because you have songs...
I was just going to say, it has the variety of something like, you know, Pure Guava, but it also is fully fleshed. It's no longer, them stuck in the closet. It's a fully functioning, studio album with all, instruments and it sounds great. It holds up today. There is nothing, dated about it. It's fully formed and fully fleshed. It's the first, fully, I keep saying the same thing. It's the first fully formed Ween album.
I would say that, so there's the songs Candy and the HIV song, I will admit, as being low points. So I have no illusions here. But I think that there's such an overwhelming amount of other fantastic material that a couple skippable songs really cannot sink this ship. You just have too much that's just phenomenal. Buenos Stars Amigo is an amazing, it's such a parody that it's no longer a parody, and it's just an amazing song.
Yeah.
Joppa Road. I mean, and don't forget Voodoo Lady.
Voodoo Lady
is another song that I think we take for granted, but that's just Ween rock funkadelic. That's one of the best rock funkadelic sort of hybrids, examples of that musical genre ever made by anyone.
Right. A Tear for Eddie, is on Chocolate
Yeah, is a beautiful instrumental.
Yeah, beautiful song.
That's a song that in 1994, Ween was going to tell the world, take us seriously.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, and it's so there's just one after another. In addition, Take Me Away also is a phenomenal way to start an album. It's Take Me Away. It's you're going into the album and being taken away. It's it really works well as an introductory song. And so the album just flows very well. Don't Shit Where You Eat is a great way to end the album.
Absolutely.
With this slow, melodic, don't shit where you eat, my friend. Mm-hmm. It's so the album really works as far as how it goes. It starts out, this first several songs is like a tour de force, and it really just boom, 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 and just doesn't let you go.
Yeah.
Doesn't let you go until you're suddenly you take a little break and it's Drifter in the Dark,
Yeah, totally.
It's just and then you realize, wow, man, we're into it now. And then you get Voodoo, and then it's not over yet, because then you got Voodoo Lady, Joppa Road, Buenos Stars Amigo, what Diener was talking about. I mean, I don't want to the point today is not to just list album song lists,
but
right?
You can't help it.
How can you not just remind everyone the songs that are on
this
album?
Yeah, I mean, you just can't help it. It's I'm looking at the track listing here also, and it's if you were to go see Ween and they just played that whole album, you would have no complaints. You know what I mean? Really. I mean, just a batch of amazing songs that, they all sort of work together. They all sort of flow very nicely. And, just a great record.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So should we go to our last pick, or do you want to say something else?
Yeah, go for it. Why don't you make the announcement?
So
this is not necessarily number one, people. This is we're not picking a number one, but this
was the other one.
The other unanimous
right. This is
choice.
the other one that both Rory and I would put on our top three, and it's the Mollusk. The Mollusk is what they were putting out when we first got into Ween. When we first started listening to Ween, it was Chocolate and Cheese. Or no, I shouldn't say that, because the country album came in there, but
Well, yeah, the Chocolate and Cheese was the first album I heard, and then Golden Country Greats came out later that year.
But when I think about us starting to go see them, I think about the Mollusk era, because that's really after the country tour was over, those songs kind of got sort of retired there for a while. Besides Piss Up a Rope and Mr. Richard Smoker, it was the Mollusk. That was sort of the first batch of new, straight up Ween songs, to be presented. And, what can you say? I mean, it's just a fantastic album. There again, they sort of put a concept around the whole thing. And I really don't think there's any other band that had sort of ever captured a nautical theme or a nautical feel so well as Ween has with the Mollusk.
This album does a fantastic job on a conceptual basis. Like, this idea of conceiving of this nautical / sea shanty, I also often feel a bit like Irish folk historical.
Yeah.
Like, there's this very interesting, like, by the sea shanty Irish folk type thing going on that I don't know that anyone's ever pulled off conceptually an album like that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it stands alone, and it's like, and you think about how you have the whole band at this point, and they're all working together, and that can't help but increase the cohesion. And this is an example of where it's conceptually linked, where there's this theme, but the songs there's such a variety of songs.
Yeah, it's like that is sort of the hardest thing to do when you're talking about a quote unquote concept record. It's like, you can't just have everything, sound the same. You got to have some different, variety. It's like each one has its own thing, its own unique sort of feel to it, and yet they all sort of flow together on that same vibe, and they all sort of have that, again, nautical or ocean sort of theme or feel.
Yeah, and it starts with "I'm Dancing in the Show Tonight," which is kind of the only one that doesn't have that feel. But Ween's never made a better song to open an album with, or a live show. And, it's like, it's just great. "I'm Dancing in the Show Tonight." It's like it's the beginning of the show. It's the beginning of the album. It's like a perfect way to start the album. You have songs on here that it would be easy for someone just to look at the lyrics and be like, oh, that's a silly song. But man, when you are listening to the Mollusk, you are suddenly on a beach picking up shells, listening to the ocean come in, like living in a fantasy world. Like, suddenly it's Saturday morning cartoons, and it's like, and you're on the beach and you're listening to the seashell, and it's just like, it really brings you in. It's just in a way that few bands and few songs are able to do. There's not a lot of throwaway on this album. Almost the entire thing is really it's just like, except for maybe Pink Eye, that is kind of like, okay, whatever. Like, everything else is just really tight. It's a tighter album than Chocolate and Cheese. And there are some songs on here that are just, mind-blowingly, like, as good as anything out there. She Wanted to Leave sounds like a song that people should be learning in middle school music. Yeah. Because it sounds like an Irish folk tune.
I mean, I'll say this right now. I sing that song to my kids at night. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing,
Cold Blows the Wind could be like a song of like some Scottish like docksman like coming home and like going over to the grave, blah blah blah. It's like such a creepy song that really makes you feel like the fog of the oceans coming in over the, it just really sets a mood and is a beautiful but chilling song, and it really just puts you in that like place. Same with like Buckingham Green. Like, man, they tap into like the sort of heritage of Pink Floyd, and just suddenly have these like completely epic, like obscenely epic notes. That's something that they one of the high water marks of epicness in Ween is Buckingham Green.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. Ocean Man is similar to the Mollusk in the fact that it's like, you think, oh, that's a goofy song, but then when you're singing it, it just puts you right down there, man. And there's an ocean man, and he's there.
Yeah.
And it's just, so it all like, it's like, how did Ween pull it off? Like, they only have a few albums that are like really conceptual or concept albums, The Mollusk, Golden Country Greats are the really two that stand out. And to have this be the one, it's almost another thing that's all really audacious to say, haha, we did this country album. Well, now we're getting back together with our regular boys, and but we're gonna record this crazy sea shanty album, and like, and it's like, it's so equally audacious to think, oh, we're gonna back one concept album up with another, and then have it be so different.
Yeah.
And yet still so, and what the Mollusk does that Golden Country Greats doesn't do is that this is just like obviously so true to all of Ween sort of history. It's like these songs still like all fit into it, you know, and you see this is also where you do see some of those sort of Ween tropes, you know, like I'll Be Your Johnny on the Spot, you know, but this is the last album where they really just like still work really well. You know, and so like I say, I'll Be Your Johnny on the Spot feels like a leftover from Golden Country Greats, and somehow creates this bridge between the albums. The Blarney Stone, which a lot of people that aren't Ween heads might be turned off by, somehow also just puts me right in like a crazy like Irish pub in like 1850,
yeah, it fits.
like right by the dock, you know. And it just like puts you into that crazy like sailors and pirates and sea shanty, and they're all like drunk and being really just obscene and rude, you know, and just putting it in that crazy like setting. Like, you know, it's almost like this could be a soundtrack for some kind of crazy movie that takes place right by the
Well,
ocean.
it still has the sense of humor. You know what I mean? So there's a couple of tracks where it's like Dancing the Show Tonight, Blarney Stone, Pink Eye. So it's like you still have some Ween sense of humor there, where it's like, okay, we're still not taking ourselves too seriously, you know, but you know, we're going to throw everything on this album and show that, you know, we do have the goods, you know, we have the skills.
Yeah, they're painting this, they're painting like a fantasy world. They're creating this fantasy world through song that feels so real. Like that's why I keep mentioning Irish, and you could probably put other, you know, sort of cultural descriptors in front of that as well. But I just keep thinking this like Northern Atlantic thing, and they just it's put together so well to be in that vein, but still have that variety. You know, still have and still be like true to Ween. You know, like. I don't know how you pull off I don't know how you check off all those boxes.
Yeah, I don't know how either, but they did. You know, they did it, you know. Now, see, here again, you know, I keep bringing up the live show. I don't want to, you know, again, we don't want to do that, but I can't help it. You know, it's like, you look at the track listing on this album, and there again, it's like, you going to complain with any of that when it's played live? Really? I mean, maybe Blarney Stone, just because there was a long time where they did that, like, every show. You know, but it's like there are some tracks on this album. You know, you mentioned Buckingham Green. It's like you could open a show with that. You could close a show with that. You could play that at any time, and it's going to be great. You know what I mean? You could play that song any time at a Ween show, and it's going to be amazing. You know, it fits no matter what. Mutilated Lips, you know, is another one. You know what I mean? It's just
the Golden
Eel.
I mean, that was the other. Yeah, they're building the mythology. You know, like there's a Ween mythology out there, right? And there's you look to an earlier song, you know, talking about the Boognish Rising and all this thing, but you have some amazing mythology, Ween mythology being built here. Like I can't reveal the words of the Golden Eel. You know, it's like that's pretty intense. You know, that's like Lovecraftian almost.
It's true. It's very true. You know, it's almost like Chocolate and Cheese and the Mollusk, you know, maybe White Pepper. You know, even though we didn't include that in our top three, it's like that's what's sort of the basis for like their live career, in my opinion. If that's okay to say.
Well, yeah, as the band is constituted, and you look at when they sort of constituted, and that is the basis of it. You know, yeah, we're not mentioning White Pepper. I think it was really close to getting in the top three, but I feel like the prime of Ween is from Pure Guava to the Mollusk, and I think White Pepper is still really close to that, but it's a couple years later, and it's a little bit transitional to, excuse me, it's a little bit transitional to the later Ween period of Quebec and La Cucaracha. I mean, if you look at so for example, as studio albums, just looking at the studio albums and not including anything else, from 1990 to 1997, you've got 6 albums in 8 years, you know, which is phenomenal output that you only see from like bands like the Beatles and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and Bob Dylan. You know,
it's pretty true.
You know, how do How do you put together that many albums in such a short period and have them all be great, right? And so we're looking at that period from 92 to 97 sort of almost as a peak, or rather the many peaks in there, but like that's their prime time as far as songwriting and albums. And then, White Pepper is now 3 years after that, 2000, then Quebec's 3 years later, then La Cucaracha's 4 years later. And you look at an obvious drop in quality production in terms of total, because, so from 1997 to 2007, that's 11 years. And then there's only 3 albums in that time period, Like, they have a 10-year period where they only have 3 albums.
Right.
So it is a different era, and we didn't include White Pepper in that because I just don't think it's just quite as amazing. But yeah, White Pepper is interesting because they're back to sort of they're back to doing like Ween albums. And when I said Chocolate and Cheese is like the greatest, most quintessential Ween album, like that to me distinguishes it from. It's funny because I sort of mean like as juxtaposed to. Like Golden Country Greats and the Mollusk, which are these like concept albums, and as far as just a pure like, hey, this is a Ween album, like White Pepper is that, like that's them going back to that as the 5-member band and still put together an awesome album.
Absolutely.
And then after that, you start to see, that's a whole nother conversation, maybe another podcast, is like looking at our own interpretation of the rise and fall of Ween through their vis-a-vis their studio albums.
Right.
But yeah, dude, the Mollusk, it's just really hard to criticize too much on that album. And there's just it's amazing. I look at it and say, this is a perfect example of how you can take songs that would seemingly be like goofy and silly, but they're not. They're like epically serious and just really painting this like fantastical like community along the sea where these like fantastical things are happening with sea creatures, and it's really like it's like I said, it's like no other album does this, and what they do with this album is basically tell a story, set the scene for like a fantasy world.
Yeah. And
and you can literally dive right in.
They take you right to it. There is no question about it. Just thinking about the actual song, The Mollusk itself, I don't think there's any other one song that I can think of that, it's like when I hear The Mollusk, it's like water, period. It's like the sound effect that, it's like, I gotta get that in there. It's like, to me, that it's the bubbles. You know what I mean? That's what that is. It's just I can't think of any other song that just when I hear that, it's just like that makes me think of that. Period. There's no doubt in my mind. You know what I mean? And it's just when you look at the whole album, it's like I don't think any other band has really ever captured something so well like Ween the Mollusk does. I know that's a bold statement, but it's just sort of like they were going for, that sort of concept, and they nailed it. Without just singing all songs about, fish and boats and, no, it's done in a very smart, very brilliant, beautiful kind of way. Still has a little bit of sense of humor to it, but yet it's just done fucking great. What else can you say?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And just some of the beautiful songs. I mean, I that's what I love about Ween is that they have so many different sides to them. And one side is these like beautiful, somber, sweet songs, and it's gonna be all right. Cold blows the wind. She wanted to leave. It's like they slow it down, and they do a great job of doing that. And it's like, and those songs, She Wanted to Leave is almost like a story unto itself. Obviously, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can envision this like ship coming in, and it's like she's on the ship and blah blah blah. Cold Blows the Wind, as I already covered, it's just like really deep and like chilling. It's gonna be all right. What a sweet song. Somber and sweet. It's like they do that so well. And then you also have things like the Golden Eel, which like just like, you know, it's like very epic and like deep into this fantastical Ween mythology.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, and it's interesting because maybe that's another podcast right there, is talking about the Ween sort of legendarium, their mythology. It's like they've used their songs to build like a mythology, and like this album does a lot of that work.
Totally, man. Absolutely. Well,
so yeah, man. I mean, that's our. So I'd love to hear if people want to put comments, like, you know, what they agree or disagree. You know, and as we mentioned at the beginning, it's like, you know, there's so much to Ween and there's so many sides to it that that's easy for people to have completely different opinions about what they love about Ween, or what albums are their favorite.
Yeah, and I mean,
and a lot of this stuff also comes into like play, like when did you start getting into Ween? You know, like what age were you when you started getting into Ween? Like what was your first album you ever heard? Like so but I'd love to hear what other people have to say, like about if they agree or disagree with the four total that we discussed as being like the crust.
Yeah, I mean, can you pinpoint your absolute favorite Ween album? No question. Or, you know, do you have to do what we do? Do you have to, you know, can you even pick a top three? Maybe there's some people that just couldn't even bring themselves to do it. You know, we want to hear your thoughts. So hit us up on Twitter. Hit us up on email. It's at WeenCastPodcast on Twitter, and WeenCastPodcast at gmail.com. If you know someone who might like the show, you know, hey, give us some love and share with your friends. Write us a review on iTunes, or write us a comment on YouTube. Whatever you'd like to do. We love hearing everything. We appreciate anyone who has listened to any of our shows so far. This one, the ones to come. And yeah, thank you so much, you know, for listening. And we hope that you agree with this list, but if not, we want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, we appreciate everyone listening, and yeah, this is like, you know, they have a lot of great albums, you know, and you know, if I'm being really honest, I would say that every album but La Cucaracha is truly great. And I'm sorry, man, I'm just being honest. And so all I'm saying is there's 8 albums that all really could somehow fit into that top 3.
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
I think there's a lot of stuff.
So it really is a tough thing.
Yeah.
You know, to
yeah, I mean, again, I think each one of the albums has more creativity in them than a lot of other bands will ever do in like their entire career. You know, I don't know if that's a harsh statement, but you know, I just feel like that's true. You know what I mean? And the people who don't get Ween, you know, there's a lot of Ween fans out there, and there's a lot of people who, you know, you guys know who I'm talking about. The people that just don't get it. You know what I mean? It's like, there's just those people that just are never going to get it. You know what I mean? And that's just how it is. But I feel like every one of the Ween albums is amazing. And they're just, yeah, it's just way too hard to just say, oh, this one's the best or this one's my favorite. It was just way too hard. You know, it was hard enough just picking a top 3, really. Yeah,
and you know, you can think about like the thing that you could also do is think about, well, this is my favorite album if I'm thinking about this. This is my favorite album if I'm thinking about that. Like,
yeah.
You know, how brown is an album, how creative is an album, how much variety, how much production. You know, it's like there's a lot of different ways that you could rank Ween albums.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean,
they're that different.
I mean, it's like, you know, we try to pick our favorites, you know, not necessarily the ones that we think are, you know, technically the best, or, you know, the best production of the songs, or the best, you know, that's a whole nother, you know, conversation. It's like, I feel like you have to sort of pick your favorites for whatever reasons they are, you know? So it was a very hard decision to just make a top 3. It really was.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything else, Rory?
But yeah, dude, I'll echo what you said. Just, you know, we'd love to hear you guys and let us know what you think. And thank you for people listening. It's awesome that you're out there. we hope we contributed something to the conversation today.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. Anyone that's out there that's listening to this, again, hit us up on email or on Twitter, at WeenCastPodcast at Twitter, and WeenCastPodcast at gmail.com. So thank you so much, everyone. Really.
Yes, peace be with you.
Peace. We out. Thank you.
Later.